Hey there everyone. Today I'm going to teach you how to work the alternating color braid that is featured in my first Snow Beanie pattern. So right here I have the child size of the pattern that I'm working. What I've already done is I'm working with 42 stitches with US 13 or 9mm knitting needles. I have knit rows 1 through 6 in my rib. I have already, excuse me, knit row 7, which is kind of a setup row for the braid, which is knitting all of the stitches. So beginning on row 8, this is much better shown than trying to write it out. It's really confusing in the written method. So the video truly helps. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go through the entire stitch count that's on the needles, which is again our 42 stitches. The most important parts of this whole pattern are the first 2 stitches that we're going to work and then the last stitch that we're going to work. Okay, so after we get done the first ones and you kind of catch on, you can go ahead and fast forward to the end if you don't want to watch the whole thing. But for the first time through, a lot of people find it really useful to watch the entire thing. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to just go ahead and knit this first stitch with our main color yarn, okay, which is my Malabrigo Rasta in Solace. The second stitch, we're going to go ahead and add our contrasting yarn. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to insert the right needle into the second stitch as if we're going to knit. And then we're just going to kind of loop this around, right? Just your basic join into the next stitch. Then what we're going to do is what is called a cross right over left. So we're going to take this first stitch and we're going to cross it in front of this left stitch. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to go ahead, we're going to stick our left needle under the front of this stitch. We're going to slide this off. This second stitch, of course, is going to fall off the needle, and all we're doing is switching the placement for this step. So just put that second stitch right back on your needle. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to knit this previous first stitch through the back loop with our contrasting yarn. So what's left is we have 2 of the contrasting yarns, 2 contrasting stitches on our needle, and this is the first stitch of our braid, okay? And it's going to look a little funny to begin with, but you'll see how it goes. One word to note, you want to make sure that your tail is about 5 inches long of your contrasting yarn, because when we knit all the way around, this is actually going to create a hole right here. And we're going to use the tail of our contrasting yarn to complete the join here. And I'll show you how we're going to do that here, or I'll explain it to you. So starting with our third stitch, we're going to switch to our main color yarn. We're going to knit, okay, and then our cross right over left. Slide our main color off, insert into the back, and knit into the back loop, okay? So now you can see that we've switched places again, right? So this stitch right here used to be the ivory, and now we've replaced it with our main color. And so you're going to continue in this method all the way around until you get to the end. So you're going to have 2 colors, and then the main color will drop off. Then it'll be replaced with 2cc, you know, 2 of the contrasting colors. It'll drop off and we'll continue. So here we go. So this is a braid that I first saw used as a decrease, but I've never seen it used as not a decrease. I don't know what it's called. So if anybody finds out, please do let me know. So we've got 2 main color. Go back to our contrasting yarn. And we're just going to kind of go around. It does take a little bit of practice, but I find personally that this braid is so much easier than knitting an Estonian braid or a Vikkel braid. It's definitely not a Latvian braid. It is very different, and once you kind of get into the hang of it, then it actually moves along pretty quickly. The results are just stunning. So another thing to note with this pattern is, I know that everybody is familiar with the elongated stitches that come into play when you work with a Vikkel braid or an Estonian braid. The stitches, you just can't ever seem to get them not to be elongated and look a little goofy. And what I wanted to do with this pattern is I really wanted to capitalize on the elongated stitches in the next row, because it really creates a really neat Fair Isle pattern, which is what leads us into the entire rest of this first Snow Beanie, right? So I just think it was a really neat way to have a really beautiful demarcation in the brim, and really use something that, you know, is kind of a nuisance to our advantage in this case. So you can see it doesn't really take much effort, but you can see that the pattern that we're creating is like this really beautiful laid out stitch, and it just, you don't have to really mess with it at all. It just lays naturally very nicely. That's one of the things I love with it. With the Vikkel braids, I always feel like I have to mess with it too much, and it is a little confusing for me. I did have a group of wonderful test knitters who also agree that the video version is much easier to follow than any written version that I can do, that I'm able to produce. But it does work. The feedback that I received is you can do this continental style. As you can see, I'm very much an English knitter. Go ahead and give these a tug. Don't pull them too tight. Just give them a little tug so they're snug. Sorry, got off track. So it does work well with continental stitching. It is just a little bit different. Unfortunately, I can't demonstrate that because I'm not a strong continental knitter. So we're almost halfway here. You just kind of get into a natural rhythm. Make sure you've got 2 main colors. Switch your places. Now we have 2cc, and it just all kind of works out. I really love this. Like I said, I've never seen this before, other than a decrease. So if we got to give it a name, I don't know, we're gonna have to ponder on that one for a while. In the pattern, I just called it an alternating braid. Alternating color braid is what I called it in the pattern, because I didn't know what else to call it. Of course, my dog wants to come in. as I'm recording. So hopefully she won't scratch on the door. Nope, she's just gonna let herself in. Oops. Yep, just make sure, like I said, sometimes it gets a little sticky. Just make sure that it doesn't, that you don't lose that stitch as you're working your way around. Now, one thing to note is if you find yourself in a situation where you forget to alternate, that's not very fun. To go back, just remember, what I find is I remember that this loop needs to be worked through the back loop, and that's usually where that's my dog lapping her tail. I find that if I just go back to a point where I can pick up that loop, it's easier for me to fall back in place and correct it. So we're almost done here. Oop. Oop. Just snag it. Couple more stitches and then we will get to the finishing stitch, because that is also just a little bit different. But we need to make sure that we stay in line with this alternating pattern here for this particular knitting pattern for the first Snow Beanie. And I also created a pattern that is the D-Mark Beanie, which uses the same braid, same technique. That's where I actually discovered how I could change that decrease style braid into a continuous braid without decreasing the stitches. And in that one, I actually just used one color throughout the entire pattern. And that looked really neat too. And then I was like, oh, maybe I can, you know, make my life and everybody else's a little bit more complicated and create a two-toned. Okay, so we're down to our last two stitches. So for the first, well, to the second to last stitch, we're going to continue in pattern. So knit with our main color. Okay, so it's just like your regular main color. This next one, so we have our two main colors. So the next one, we're going to work it as if it's in pattern with our contrasting color. Okay. And then we're going to cross right over left, normal, okay? But instead of knitting with our contrasting yarn, we're actually going to complete this stitch with our main color yarn, because if we finish it with the contrasting yarn, then we'll have 3 contrasting yarn colors in a row, and we want to make sure that this continuation of the alternating colors continues to the end. So we're just going to knit through the back loop with our main color. Okay, so now you have actually completed the entire braid. And then when you get to the end, if this next stitch on the next row is a slip stitch, and the reason why we do that is because if we knit it, normally it would create this really large jog, and we don't want that. So I put in the slip stitch so they align more clearly, and you can go ahead and you can complete the join through the back of your work at the end. Or what you can do is you can refer to the pattern, and it will show you with pictures how to complete the duplicate stitch over the top with the tail of your yarn. So I hope that you found this video helpful, and continue on in the pattern with slipping this first stitch purlwise. Give that a little tug, and away you go.